starting with
Kind of.
chapter 7 and 8 today. Chapter 7 is everyone needs help. And I thought I'd go through, and I think the focus is on petitionary prayer. There were a lot of good, I thought there were a lot of really good tidbits in here. It says, why do so many of us have a difficult time with petitionary prayer? Perhaps we don't want to ask God for help because I think that's printed wrong. And I think it should be, because if we did,
Where are you,
It's-
Dan?
on
Okay.
page 89, this sentence just doesn't
Okay.
seem right to me. God's help because it's what we did owe as children. Or perhaps we were told by a priest, a spiritual director, an author, a friend who got it from some other theologian, that it's wrong or selfish to ask for things in prayer, to which I say baloney. That's a relief on that. In the book of Numbers, Moses also begs God to be merciful to his people. The Old Testament is virtually a record of requests for God's help. In the book of Genesis, when God decides to punish the city of Sodom for its sins, Abraham bargains with God, which I always thought bargain was a real big no-no. Then on 90, the first book of Samuel, Hannah begs God for a child.
Operator, how may I help you?
Hello? Mhm. Oh, yeah, we're all here. Oh, no. No. Well, not your fault, certainly. I'm sorry to bother you too.
Trying to look behind the door under the flower pot. I mean, a key under the flower pot by the door.
Yeah. I know.
I mean, if I wouldn't let into the building, get the door and let people in, then you'd have a maid.
No, you're fine, you're fine. I hope.
We know it. When we built our garage, we did a touchpad so that we don't ever have to be concerned about when we have to.
Yeah, except, those two different batteries.
I do.
I had them before.
Well, since I'm able to get the equipment to work, then something else would have had to go wrong. So I mean, I suppose we're right on track. Okay. And anyone who reads the Psalms, even curiously, will see that they're crammed with requests for God's help. I mean, I did a Bible study with a group at St. Peter's. In fact, we're still in it. But it's about the Psalms, and in the back of the book, it divided them into different categories, and the laments were a long list, beautifully written, but obviously all prayers. Then you come with the Lord's Prayer on 91. Give us our daily bread. Well, I don't know, how can, after reading these things, I thought, how can we walk away feeling guilty asking for anything when the Bible's plastered with it? Where did it come from that we aren't supposed to ask for things? That would be interesting to find out where that really
Does it come from the Calvinists?
maybe. The
'Cause I could see
Puritans
that
are-
being very Calvinistic, that God has it all preordained, and what happens has been planned since the foundation of time.
And so it's God's plan, you just live with it. I can see it coming from the Puritans to the Calvinists real easily.
Which falls in with what my friends say, a couple of my friends say that God knows everything anyway.
Yeah.
So why bother? I mean, it doesn't.
I'm feeling it right now.
Well, maybe it's all about the act of asking.
Yes.
It's maybe more about the act and where it puts us in relationship to God than if God knows you're gonna die anyway, or you're gonna have something anyway, but it's that act of asking or being remembered. I don't know. That's just a.
Well, David was really great for petitioning God to save him because he had so many enemies around him. But he didn't forget to thank him too, when things got better. David's both sides of the coin. I mean, his own son went after him once. I'm sure sometimes God looked down at David and went, oh, hey, babe.
I think that happened with about all of them, probably, you know.
I feel incredibly blessed. And my simple little home and my, what is it now, 7-year-old car. And my refrigerator full of food. And my closet full of warm clothes.
Yeah.
And my car that takes me to see my children and grandchildren. And I have been to Egypt, and I have been to Turkey, and I have seen poverty that makes the poor, just here, even here in the city, wealthy by comparison. Wealthy by comparison. People living without a wall in their apartment because it's been blown out since the last war. And they've got an old ragged blanket hanging over the hole in the wall in their 4th or 5th floor apartment. And children sitting on the edge of it.
Yeah.
With their feet hanging over it. It's 4 or 5 stories to the ground. And it's like, how can I be so selfish to ask for anything? And sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. I mean, but it has to be one of those I'm on my knees undone kinds of needs. Because I just feel so rich compared to other people. You know, if I can't come to church, I turn on the TV.
Yeah.
You know, oh, well, there's Dean Handy and then Handy and the organ and the choir. You know, I mean, I'm just so filthy rich compared to most of the people in the world. I'm almost 79 years old, and I take a thyroid pill and an antidepressant. And I've taken those medications since I was in my 40s. So that's not even, and Bob doesn't take any medication. He's 71.
He's got it made.
Yeah, and so, I mean, even our health, yeah, I have blood clots and I have issues and whatever. But I mean, basically, I'm so healthy. I mean, God has given me so much.
I saw a PBS on a gentleman who was one of China's new rich. He was a millionaire. And his mother had what would be considered a nice house. So he goes out into the country to see her. And it was a typical old Chinese open style house. But she didn't live in it alone. Her part of the house is basically around the kitchen. And then you go around the corner and that's somebody else's house. And you just wander through the rooms, and I guess they respect all that. And that's how everybody lived. But at one time, that house belonged to somebody with money.
Yeah.
So, and he could have taken her out of there any time. She didn't want to go.
Because that was her norm.
It was her normal, yeah.
I just about lost it in Egypt. I got so depressed. It was just, I don't know what, Bob's like, well, what? And it's like, I'm gonna slap you. Never done it, but I could. But, I mean, the starvation, the starved animals pulling carts,
Yeah.
horribly heavy things, the children. I saw these little kids like 4 and 5 years old, and they were making their own breakfast outside over a fire, which they had built.
Sure.
You know, my kids at 5 weren't allowed to touch matches.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, in India, it isn't
Yeah, it's
any
got
better.
No, I know. It's
Book I
gotta be
read
better.
said, you know, you'll pay the rent of the landlord before you buy enough food because he will throw you out that very day it's due onto the street. You may not get back in. They didn't have sufficient housing in Calcutta and some other places, so that's how they survived. They actually, somebody in that predicament would, family would just pretty much be out looking for food all day long.
I had a conversation, this was years ago when I was in grad school. I was in my 30s when I was in grad school. He was a colleague of my boss, John Cheesick. And John was going to go to India and actually wanted me to go along as like administrative assistant. It was a business trip. And we had gone, the three of us, the guy from India and John and I had gone out to lunch to talk about this. And I asked him, and it was probably a very uncouth question to ask. But I said, how do you deal emotionally with all the hunger and the poverty that India has? He said, I have high walls around my house.
Oh, no.
And I'm still just stunned by an answer like that. But it was the truth. I didn't mean to be offensive. I probably was offensive. It's such a blunt question.
Well, that's what started Mother Teresa. She was in a exclusive Catholic girls' school with a big wall around it. Of course, they did have the big iron gates where you could see out and see some things. And she couldn't stand what she saw outside. And she just started to petition the Vatican to let her go out and work on the streets. It took a long time, but they let her go work out on the streets. She had worldwide success. So something can be done.
Which is a good segue. Page 93,
Moving right along.
that second paragraph, no, I mean, it's right into what we're talking about.
I'm
It
teasing
says
you.
that others suffer does not mean that our needs are unimportant, but you must keep your suffering in perspective.
Yeah.
Which I
Yes.
agree with that. My thought is, because I've traveled, I've probably seen more of Mexico than I have of this country.
That's pretty.
And there's brutal poverty there. And, but to me, being able to say what your needs are, it goes back to like the last week when we were talking about having a relationship or a friendship with God. I mean, you tell your friends about things that you're needing or wanting or what you may need in the future. I just think it's part of normal communication. If you're wanting to have a deep relationship with God, I would think that would have to be a piece of it.
Communication.
Because why wouldn't you? If you were honest with everything else, why wouldn't you have that be a part of it? I mean, no, it's not like, obviously I'm not starving. It's not like I'm going without food. But like even in the Lord's Prayer that we're talking about, it includes asking for your daily bread, your daily needs.
Well, and the word us indicating that it's communal, which I've never thought about.
I had
Well, in fact, yeah, I like that in here too, where it said our Father, not my Father, our Father, bringing a community.
Collectiveness.
You know, there's just so much. I just hope I absorb a lot of what I read, because he just has such a wealth of
Yeah,
good information.
for some of this is the third time I read because whenever we started the class with Jerry, and so I read it then, and then I, like this chapter, I read last week, and then I started reading it again because I thought I'm never gonna remember remember all this.
I think the key there is perspective. It's what you pray for. And I don't know, I guess I never felt like anyone told me not to pray or ask for things. But as you get older and put things in perspective, there's some things that count and some things that don't. I forget the exact example in the book, but a little girl or something wanting to, I forget what it was, but said it's okay to ask. And then God said, but I don't really care what happens. I can't remember the passage or the page. But I think it, as we mature, thinking about what's important and what's not. And
I pray for my children, and they're in their 50s. And they're still my children. And it's for them, but I also think it was very selfish for me, because the thought of losing one of my kids just is devastating. And I have relationship-wise, I've lost one of my children. But there's always hope for reconciliation. And I pray for that as well.
When you have a friend or family that is drifted into a, fatal illness, I think I would always pray all the way through that, even knowing there was only the slimmest chances of recovering. Just so they would know that somebody prayed for them.
Well, I know when I will pray about my needs, more times than not, it leads me into thinking about other people's needs. Because I'll think, oh, here I am praying for this. Oh, well, why am I praying for this when there's so many people that are in so much bigger need? And blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, maybe in a roundabout way, it has its purpose as well. The thing that astounded me when I was in Mexico, people, no, not everybody, don't get me wrong, but there were a lot of people that I would just consider dirt poor. I mean, they were literally, their structure was mainly cardboard with maybe a tin roof, TV antenna, a little bitty TV, dirt floor. And a lot of them were happy as could be. Now, I don't know how, but they were.
Yeah, Mike went to Africa before COVID, and we'd been giving just to the support of a girl there, and she had graduated from high school. And so when he was asked if he wanted to go with the group here from Kansas City, he said that would be great, because it'd be nice to be able to see her. And when she met Mike, she was so grateful for supporting her and her family that she was able to get through high school. And now she's about to finish college, and so she's going to age out from this program. And they showed us, they showed Michael the animals that they were able to buy, and how they were able to sustain their lives on an amount that giving that amount was not a big deal, but it changed her life. And so that's that kind of thing when you realize, especially when you have an organization that's putting the money where the ministry is, and so you can actually meet these people. And he said the amazing thing when he was there is that while these people were so impoverished, they were happy. He said, I can't believe how happy these people are.
Yeah.
I've done the thing where you buy a goat, or a family to have a milk goat, for the kids and everything. I bought a sewing machine, a treadle sewing machine to help village industry. And I was pleased let it go to the people, don't let this be a scam.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, when I have seen those families like I'm talking about, part of me says, so what's wrong with us?
Yeah.
And you think about their relationships and dependence on family and community, et cetera. And speaking as someone who kept getting transferred for the last 40 years here and there, you lose those connections. Even family visits, for some of us, become few and far between. But that's being a part of that, having that overall community, both close family and otherwise, has got to be so important. And I can understand the happiness.
And I'm not poo-pooing poverty by any measure. I mean, it just makes me sick that people are so poor. But it also, on the flip side, it makes me think, why aren't we happier?
Yeah.
We
I
have
mean,
so much.
our culture, our culture is so,
Negative,
maybe
actually.
we have a great car. Oh, no, but we need the newest model. You haven't arrived unless you have the newest model or the biggest house or the biggest boat or it's just,
To the point now, I think, the big house, oh no, well, I'm gonna have to clean that one too. Or the big car, I would have to clean that one too, and I don't need any more.
it's just kind of the forest for the trees. I think.
Well, I think culturally, I think we're a very negative culture. I mean, people can whine and bitch because their designer whatever isn't just, exactly what they want to do. Their kids get into a good college, but it's not the school. It's whine. I think we live in a negative culture. We look for the other side. We don't look for the bright side of the coin. We look down on the other side of the coin. I did have a friend and we had been friends since junior high. And she got so heavenly minded, she was no earthly good, but she was one of those people who truly pray for a parking space. I mean, truly pray for a parking space out loud in the car and expect you to pray for it.
It depends on how long I've been circling the
Yeah,
lot.
that's right. I might do that. And how, if the appointment is that I might be late for, but it's like, you got two really good legs and two really good feet, and you can hike 3 blocks, and it's not gonna kill you. How about a parking place for that little lady?
I know.
Gray hair back there that's practically in tears, it just seems so bizarre to me.
The only time I can think be a valid time to pray for a parking spot is if you're in an area where you would think you might not be safe.
Yes.
That would be the only time I would say, would be dear Lord, give me a safe parking spot.
that's right.
That one I can.
Under a big light.
And someone to walk me back out to my car.
Yeah.
Well, I've got the handicap sticker in my car too. I mean, legally I have a right to because I'm over 72, but I don't use it unless I feel like I have to.
Yeah, well, that's why with Dad and I mean, he's 97, be 98 in August, but anyway, he gets around fairly well. But he gets winded, like anybody 97 would do if
I
he
get
walks
winded.
very far at all. But if there are tons of parking places, we leave the handicap one open and take one. I've always been that way.
Yeah.
When my mom had ALS, if we could get close enough anyway, don't take that spot.
Yeah, Bob's got a handicap sticker, or a placard, to hang in the car. I don't think it's ever been out of the console. Actually, it was not for us though, although it would have been nice when I was so banged up a couple of years ago, but I think it belonged to this former clergyman.
You can get them for short periods of time without any problem with the doctor.
Yeah.
Not the last, but the director when I went in to work for the state, he just very bluntly told me one day walking to the parking lot, he said, see, all those handicap spots are taken. And those are all my fat ass employees that can't get themselves up to the door anymore because they ate too much. From now on, they don't get a space. And that worked for a while.
When I was in the Charlotte airport, because sometimes we come back into the US through Charlotte. And it's like half of the people there are so severely obese, you wonder how they manage, but time after time after time after time after time, you see the wheelchairs go by. As the people, then once they get to the destination, they can get up and walk just fine, but basically it's just extreme obesity.
Yeah.
You must just
Well, and-
eliminate, right?
I mean, there've been so many medical studies done in the last 10 years that show that it's much more genetic than people want to admit. And that's why it's easier to get that
liposuction.
stomach stapling, for lack of a better term. Those kind of surgeries approved because they have come out with a lot more data that shows that it's a lot more genetically linked. A lot of people have never, ever been skinny. They've never been trim, period, ever. So I mean, it's not always, that people are overeating. I mean,
Well, sure, and the diabetes can actually run in the family, but they have a
Absolutely.
better way to control it now. If you're brave enough to do it.
Carbs are not our friend.
well, on 94, it says, what should we pray for? Or better put, what can you pray for? And Martin says, in his opinion, you can pray for anything manifestly good. In other words, you clearly don't pray for something bad, like a horrible injury to befall someone you dislike. I love the story about the woman that was praying the rosary against one of her relatives. And they said, you can't do that. And she said, you want to bet?
Yeah.
I love priceless.
But when you read Old Testament,
When you read the Psalms.
yeah, it's like, get them, God, and kill them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're violent. They're
A
violent.
number of the Psalms are that way. I mean,
I know.
they start out with the praise and then they'll go into the, kill them, God, kill them. And then at the end.
Dash them
and then
against
there'll
the
be
rock.
hope at the end,
Amen.
Yeah, there was discussion there in the book about whether that was literal or metaphoric or whatever. And I suspect, considering the times, and I think Martin said this, is that some of it would have been literal, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, they knew that they didn't have enough people and they didn't have an ally close enough that was going to help save them. The only thing was gonna be that would help them would be, God to bring down fire from heaven. Really, and push them out of the way.
Well, when you think of everything that Jesus had been through,
Yeah.
I mean, how long can you be persecuted like that
Yeah.
without having hostile feelings?
On 96 at the bottom, I got all kinds of marks on this. At the very last, that little piece right at the bottom, it is also absurd to ask God of mercy to be unmerciful. It goes against all that we know about God. And I don't agree with that statement. I've read Old Testament. And I mean, let's drown all the Egyptians that come out after the Jews, let's smite these people, let's
Kill all the firstborn.
yeah. And so, I mean, Old Testament God it can be pretty
Mean.
mean, yeah.
But they were all given a warning.
And then it says, oh, it's absurd to think that the mercy of God could turn into not being merciful, but that was not being merciful. Or maybe it was his chosen people, but not to the other people. I mean, I have a hard time. I don't really like Old Testament because I don't like this cognitive dissonance that sets up in my head between this God of war in Old Testament, basically, and this good and loving God in New Testament. It's like, what? Huh? We're, God's supposed to be constant, but that's not constant.
Well, I was always taught that Christ took away God's anger.
Well, that's a nice story. Excuse me.
Well,
Meow.
but to me, it makes sense.
But Christ is God. He has been since the beginning of everything. He's just a manifestation of God. So he is God. So he was there during all of that.
I don't know.
I don't
I wonder
either.
that, but once he became human, did that change everything?
Yeah, that's probably where that
Human
statement
factor.
that I was giving came from.
Right.
I don't know. There are just some things that are such a mystery to me that I just try to avoid them. I'll just spin them around in my head till I can't think anymore.
Well, I went to 97 and here are the gift, Martin writes, here are the gifts for which I most frequently pray for most frequently. I can't read tonight. I offer them not as prescriptions, but as examples to make our discussion more concrete. First is wisdom. Boy, don't we need that in the world. The second is humility. Third was freedom. Fourth was perspective. I almost feel like I need to make a list of these. The fifth one is courage. The sixth one is patience. And I've always been taught you never pray for
That
patience
God will give you children.
because you'll be given opportunities to
To be
test your
patient.
patience.
Yeah, I've always thought that's why you got children, because God wanted you to learn patience.
So I backpedal quick when somebody starts talking about praying for patience.
No. Humility.
The seventh one was hope. Eighth one, inspiration. 9 is success. And I like, because when I thought of success, when I first read that, I thought, you're praying to succeed in everything in life, to make all the big money and that kind of thing. And he puts a wonderful twist on it. 10 is deliverance.
It's cool that he worked with Scorsese on a film. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's pretty bizarre, really.
He's been on TV with Stephen Colbert.
Yeah. But some of those Scorsese
But Mr.
movies are.
Sorkin.
The author of the tractor.
It's down here. The film was called Silence. I never saw it. It's about a 17th century Jesuit in Japan.
Yeah, I thought you were talking, he was on Colbert.
Oh, he was on Colbert, but it doesn't tell you here, but he was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's silly. Colbert's so crazy anyway. And Martin can be fairly comical too, so I mean, the two of them together, it's worth, it's on YouTube.
But this author with Colbert, I want to find out on YouTube, because Colbert's Roman Catholic,
Yeah.
and he's very open about his faith and his practice. He is mildly funny.
And 102 or 103, I guess it is, what happens when God seems to answer your prayers exactly as you had hoped? He lists all these things. We can savor it, thank God, show God your gratitude, share your joy.
I thought on 102, when I said how to pray for help, I just found this hysterical. It says, if it's a prayer for something big, you might make the prayer more formal for big requests. I sometimes wait until I'm at a new church or a pilgrimage or at some other holy site. And I just found that kind of, it's like women saving their good perfume for when they go out to dinner, It's like, I saved my prayer for my big formal heavy duty request. God, about that basement wall that's caving in.
That line on 105, that means a lot to me. Let's see, it's about the end of the second paragraph. It says, be kind, for everyone is fighting a hard battle. And that's what I try to remember when somebody comes across wrong or seems aggressive, or I don't always remember it, but I try.
There's a lot of little memes like that on Facebook, because I've got friends around the country, and that's kind of how we keep in touch. There's lots of memes about be kind to others, you don't know what they're doing. So it's almost a daily reminder when I check on my
And it's
friends.
almost always true. I mean, because I know in my life, when those instances have happened, then later when I find out what's really going on, I'm almost horrified. But nobody, instead of being vulnerable and talking about it, people would rather have a tough shell and, fight their way through it with everybody.
Don't we get used to that at work? I mean, you're not supposed to bring your personal problems to work, so you stick a smile on your face.
And that's so crazy, and that's how people end up like what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so you
Because they
practice
stuff
it,
it,
you
yeah.
practice it 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, that's gonna become the norm for you.
I really like this thing too on 107. It said, I often imagine lifting up a person's face to God. Sometimes I imagine accompanying the person to God, that is walking with them toward God hand in hand, and then asking God to help them. Others picture placing the person's hand in Jesus' hand. Pretty powerful. And
And I like the thing, they talked about the visualization, because I thought I might be nuts, because I do a lot of this.
well, and
In prayer.
later in the book, he talks even more about it too, because it's Ignatian spirituality uses a lot of that.
I had a friend, she's in her 70s. She's an alcoholic. Her husband used to be a federal judge. He's got lots of jerk. She'd been caught driving drunk multiple times. And they finally said, enough is enough. And they sent her to jail. I mean, real jail for months. And, and the young women there that were, on crack and stuff like that, she was supposed to get drug counseling. But she didn't. And she was just so distraught. I was afraid she would harm herself. And I said to her, I said, when I pray for you, I picture Mary, the mother of Jesus, with her arms around you, comforting you like you were a little girl, with her beautiful robes wrapped around you and engulfing you. And you can just cry, and it's okay. And she later told me, she said, there were times when that image that you gave me was the only thing between me and suicide. So sometimes I think if we share, that taught me to share those kinds of things with people that I've never shared before. But all I could do is write her a letter of comfort. And I knew her father was also a judge and a very harsh man. And someone told me one time, said, people who like to ask Mary for intercession, many times have had harsh men in their life. And so having that motherly, gentle woman's touch. So that kind of stuck with me as a way of understanding people and what they might be doing. But I never intended it to have that much impact. I just intended for her to comfort her that day and to maybe give her an idea of what she could pray for or how she could imagine herself. But I thought I was weird. So it was really cool to see all the imagery.
Well, of course, then to not want to punish someone who is part of a prominent family, a legal family like that. And truth be known, if they would have early on given her some shock time, that's what they call it, real short sentence. She found out, oh, even I could be put in jail. That might have kicked her right out of it right then.
Oh, she did, she could. She got out of it a lot, but she was in jail for like 9 months.
That's a long time. Yes.
That's a long time. Yeah.
Well, I'm probably more open to like the visual, I would call what you were talking about a visualization. And I think I'm probably more open to that kind of thing because of doing a lot of meditation and centering prayer and that kind of thing. To me, that just comes naturally. And that's why, later when he talks about Ignatian spirituality, I was thrilled, because it always feels like you're creating all this stuff new. And it's not, it's just that you weren't ready, when you learned about it in earlier times. I don't know where else I was going with
Yeah,
that.
there's a website, Sacred Space, it's run by the Irish Jesuits, and they do that. You kind of read through their, whatever it is they post for that day, and then they tell you to imagine this or that, etc. And so they use, yeah, I think it's just Sacred Space and then whatever the dot, I forget what Ireland is, IE, I think. But a lot of visualization and being Jesuits, they would that essentially be centered around Ignatian spirituality.
Isn't Pope Francis a Jesuit?
Yeah.
Because I mean, reading some of his stuff has made me appreciate Jesuits so much. I mean, I've always heard other, Catholic people talk about how special Jesuits are. And boy, it's really proven it to me.
Yeah. I Rockers is a Jesuit school.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to Rockford High School.
And the college, most of the people are too. I got to know a few of them when I worked there. It gives you a different perspective.
Well, and working in a Catholic hospital, I interface with a lot of nuns. And I know growing up in grade school, we were right up to Most Pure Heart of Mary grade school. My public grade school was right up close. I mean, a chain link fence divided us. There were rock fights, there were all kinds of stuff. There were stories about how wicked the nuns were and how they tortured the kids. I mean, you just can't even imagine. But it was so refreshing for me to work so closely with all these nuns because they were literally all just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. And so it makes me kind of, now I can pack the Jesuits in with them. Now, I'm sure there's a bad apple, but there's bad apples of every kind, but they were life-saving for the nurses at times. I mean, it was fantastic.
On the bottom of 107, that last paragraph says, we have to be open to the possibility that, as Margaret Silch writes, the answer to our prayers is us. If you're asking for someone to be helped, you might need to do the helping. If you keep praying for a friend who is lonely, but never call them or visit them, what's the point of a prayer? If we ask God to act on the behalf of others, we must be willing to become the implements of that action. Silch writes, perhaps our reluctance to do so is the reason that many of our intercessions seem to remain unanswered.
Get off of your knees and onto your feet and go do.
Somewhere in here too, I hope I'm not jumping to the next chapter, but he stated that God has no gender.
Yeah, it's a,
How do you feel about God saying our mother instead of our fine with me? I always thought God was too big for gender anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
Gender procreation.
and then in Genesis 2, where it says we created them in our image, well, then either God's both or neither.
I was reading this book, kind of a new age book, and this is like in the 80s probably, right? And my stepmother-in-law said, what are you reading? And I said, oh, I'm reading this book by so-and-so, don't even find it. And she said, oh, could I borrow it? I thought, because the author would alternate when referring to God as he and she, and he and she. So when she gave me back the book, I said, well, what did you think? And she said, well, you'll notice that I went through and took out all of the S's on she. And I thought, good old Baptist, you know?
You couldn't let it go, could
She
you?
couldn't let it go. To her, that was just anathema. She was just horrified. But the rest of the book she liked, you know. But she drew every S in front of sheet had a line struck through it.
I remember when I was a teenager, I don't know where in the country it happened, or even if it was in this country. But there were a small group of nuns at this nunnery, and they replaced the male Christ with a female Christ.
Oh, hey.
Oh, I mean, oh, you know,
Did it hit
whatever
the fan?
place. Oh, boy, did it. I mean, just. And of course, it was like, you know, everybody that's getting upset, you're missing the forest for the trees. And then our youth leader, we met with another ecumenical group. And one of the other ministers was a black minister. And he said, well, everybody in your group probably would be horribly offended if Christ were pictured as a black man.
He is in a lot of black churches.
And I said, no. And I mean, he became very angry at me. I think just thinking I was provoking him or something. But to me, it wouldn't matter. Well, I know, number one, I know Christ wasn't white as I am. To boot, how
Not
could he be?
blonde and blue eye.
Not from that part of the world. So why would it offend me if Christ were black?
Because I've been in several African-American churches, and frequently the picture of Jesus that hangs in the church somewhere, he's very dark. He's very dark. And I think that's wonderful for the kids, especially the children, to see that Jesus is like them, to relate, you know, not to this one more white man in charge.
Well, there's a number of places in the world that they have black Madonnas.
And if Jesus was dark skinned, so was Mary.
On 111, it says, we will probably never understand why it seems that some prayers are answered and others are not. But I don't have to understand God to believe in God. I trust that God hears our prayers and answers them in some way. This is an essential element of prayer, trusting that God both hears and listens. Carl Bronner, I think is how you say it, I don't know, writes that God listens to us patiently, even blissfully, an entire life long until we are through talking, until we have spoken out our entire life. I just thought that was beautiful.
And to
I mean, that's incredibly loving. And then on 113, it talked about God answers our prayers, but sometimes the answer is no. Which makes me think of the book, Why Good Things Happen, or Why Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Yeah.
And some rabbi wrote that. I can't remember who
I
it
think it
was.
was Margolis.
And I mean, I couldn't read it. I started reading it and I read the line, you think the people that died in an airplane accident prayed any less diligently than everybody else that lived? And I thought, I mean, it just ruined it for me. I couldn't read that book. And then B, it says, God answers our prayers, but we can't see how. And then God doesn't answer our prayer in the way we would like, and why remains a mystery. And the questions for this chapter were, Martin says, a common belief is that you shouldn't ask God, I think I already started, shouldn't ask God for, ask God for help, or that asking God for help is childish. And then below it, it says, have you ever felt this way? And I put at times when others have said I shouldn't always just ask for things or have predominantly petitionary prayer, which to me still goes against pray without ceasing. After reading this chapter, are you more comfortable asking for help? And I said, absolutely. I mean, asking for help is still a part of, like I just said, pray without ceasing.
You know,
Yeah.
sometimes, oh, I don't know why, is that sometimes God intends to answer your prayer, but he's gonna make you wait for a while.
It's a patience part.
It sure is.
Well, that, and I always wonder, how much do I get in the way?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like an alcoholic, one day at a time. You know, you give it over, take it back, give it over, take it back. I mean, I've had a lot of alcoholics say, yeah, I could give it over, and then take it back. And then give it back.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much I do that with. My mother was a worrier, and she unfortunately taught that if you're worrying, you're doing something about it, which is, there's nothing further from the truth. But anyway,
Right.
it makes me wonder, you know, I give it over so that I won't worry about it anymore. But then the next thing you know, I'm noticing it again. Of course, I suppose that's human nature.
Do you know the old story about the guy who's on his roof because of the flood? He's praying to God to save him, and along comes the rowboat. And he says, no, that's okay. God's going to take care of me. And along comes the motorboat. He says, no, that's okay. God's going to take care of me. Along comes one of those Coast Guard things, you know, same thing. I mean, almost a helicopter, you know. And he says, God, why aren't you helping me? And God says, I've sent 3 boats and a chopper. What do you need?
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't see it when it's in front of us.
Prayers, when I pray for help though, whether it be for myself or others, it ends up being a praise or kind of like worship when I find out the results of it usually. So even though maybe we don't want to pray for stuff all the time, I still think that the end result from paying attention ends up being more than just a prayer, you know, give me something. The second question, does it come more naturally for you to pray for yourself or for others? And I put myself at times and others at times. I mean, it just kind of depends on what's going on at the moment. Because I used to feel really guilty where I guess I thought I had to pray it in a certain order, that I had to pray for others' needs first. And there are times when there's something bugging me so bad that if I don't get it out of the way, I can't move on to the other stuff. So I get my stuff out of the way, and then I can, you know, get down to the reality. You know.
I think maybe the reason I have felt that personally, care for myself, although I have prayed situations too, I just but when Jesus spends so much time talking about caring for others, caring for others, caring for others, caring for others, loving others, caring for others, that it seems to me that that should be my focus. And you know, and I'm sure you all have the same story. I mean, my parents divorced. And in fact, they divorced many times, but they divorced each other. I had baby stillborn. My relationship with my parents was pretty iffy, and I wanted that to be better. My own divorce, which I did not believe in divorce, and I heard my whole life that my mother was going to go to hell because she was divorced. Heard that from my beloved grandmother. So, and those things aren't near as big as many of the things that happened to you all, I'm sure. But those are things I prayed hard about. And it did not seem to me that anything changed for the better.
Sometimes it's not going to, I mean, people have free will and they're either gonna listen to God or they're not. My parents fought so much at times, there were times when we were afraid to get a divorce.
Yeah.
It wasn't that bad. That never happened. Mom did move out one time.
But I know when, I can't talk about it, never mind.
Which puts us toward chapter 8. Now I lay me down to sleep. Now, I don't know, is that a pretty standard child's prayer?
Yeah.
I mean, for Episcopalians, Catholics, no. I mean, yeah, me too. Tell you,
I think that's what my mother made us,
I don't know why we had to pay that one. Then think about if I should die, it was like,
yeah, I
I'm
mean,
5
when
years old.
as an adult, when I
That went with the church I was in though.
knew what I thought, oh, how, and
Horrible for. a
how many
child.
million times did I say that as a child, not knowing what I was saying?
You
Would have
got-
been horrifying.
I need to
if
say
I
it now.
knew.
That should be the prayer. of my
How about the
age.
lullaby? How about the
That should be
lullaby with
our
the
prayer.
cradle falling out of the tree?
Yeah, Rose of my baby.
Yeah,
children don't kind
Oh,
of have
that's
that
an
concept
old
in their
thing.
mind.
yeah, I know, but I still sang it to my kids when they were crying and 3 a.m.
Which leads into the topic, of course, of rote prayers. The first question is, what role do prayers play in your faith community? And I put down that they're incorporated in the Book of Common Prayer. They were in the Lutheran liturgy as well. But they're usually communal prayers, is what I came up with.
Yeah, they are for everything.
And what role do they play in your personal life? I put down that I use them at times. I don't know, I guess I got on a kick somewhere along the way that, and he talked about it in this chapter of how prayers that you come up with on your own, I don't know if they're better or stronger or I don't know. I don't know what the right term for them is, rather than having a rote prayer.
A rote prayer is something you can always fall back on when you're feeling very bad and cannot come up with the right words, I think.
Yes, I mean, I've places in my life, I've been so overcome with emotion that I didn't have any words. I just had emotion. And so the Book of Common Prayer has been a blessing for me because I used it even before I joined the church. Actually, I think I had the Church of England's prayer book that I used. Same, basically the same thing.
I think rote prayer is needed for the communal aspect. I think Martin overuses the word rote, which is, it's kind of mindless, or you just sort of run through something. It's sort of like when you're in church on Sunday and suddenly another section, oops, what was I thinking? And then but the 2 examples and the ones that you copied, Thomas Merton. I've read a little bit of Merton, not a lot, but I'm never familiar. I've never seen that prayer before. And also, even though I know that Memorare, I wouldn't consider either of those rote or mindless. Those are things you have to pay attention to. So I think Martin, I saw some weaknesses in kind of grouping all of this together. So that I would think that the Merton prayer very personalized as a Memorare. But yeah, I had a little bit of trouble with the chapter in that regard. Maybe it's just how he's using words. Maybe it's all just semantics.
Well, I heard some pastors say that, that did a lot of nursing home visits that they would visit, longtime parishioners. And of course, they were in that state. one of the few things they could do was still recite one of the prayers. That's one of the things they could bring up in their mind. And I would think that that would give them a lot of comfort at that point.
Sure.
Because they knew what they were doing. We thought my dad was, maybe he was there, maybe he wasn't. Before he died, a couple weeks before he died, and this Catholic nun come in and talked to him. She was also a hospice nurse. And she slid that little gadget on his finger, that takes your pulse and everything, when he wasn't looking. She said, "Would you like to pray with me?" He goes, "Oh, yes." Well, our Father who art in heaven, and he pulled the whole thing up. He did the whole thing. I thought, thank God. He's not totally gone yet. It makes a difference.
Your reference to Thomas Merton prayer, maybe he sees it as a rote prayer because of his experience, which, I know we have Thomas Merton books in our house, and I know Mike's read them all, but I've not read any of them. And so it could well be that, that for someone like the author, and being familiar, he did memorize it, and then like the Catholics, maybe if I were to show this to my kids because they went to Catholic school, they may say, "Oh yeah, I know that one," where I wouldn't know it, so.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe for Martin, it is for.
Yeah,
I went to a rosary for an acquaintance that passed, and mutual friends went in, and they go to First Baptist Delivery, which is the primarily African American church, and they're Baptist to the core and have been all their life, probably born in a Baptist church, like that. And I knew the rosary, and I prayed the rosary, and they were just stunned. They were just, "How do you know that? You're not Catholic." It's like, well, it's a prayer. I prayed many times.
By the time you get done 50 Hail Marys, you
Yeah,
You got it down.
yeah. But they were almost uncomfortable because they were so used to extraneous, open. Brother Jimmy, will you close this with prayer? With Sister Sally, will you open this with prayer? And so it was so funny to see. They just kind of looked at me like I had, come in from some kind of demonic service. Catholics,
And I will never find it. But he went through the Lord's Prayer, and
Yes.
somewhere in here, before he started that or after, I don't know which, he talked about, Christ taught it to his disciples, then they taught it to so-and-so, and then they taught it to so-and-so. And I just, how rote prayers got a bad name, I don't quite get, because even your most fundamentalist or evangelical people, they say the Lord's Prayer, that's a rote prayer.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but the other ones might think something was wrong with it. So it's like, you can't get away from it, I don't think. But it just made me feel, and I'm sure I've talked about it before, but it made me feel so comforted as to how many million people have said, billions of people have said that. How many times, and are probably saying it right now. And maybe that's a little bit more into the Ignatian spirituality or whatever too, but things like that are very meaningful. And the rote prayers, I think I've shared before that one of my youth leaders used to always say, if you have a hymnal around, you always have a prayer book. And that's kind of like a rote prayer. I don't know, maybe in my 20s and 30s, I kind of poo-pooed rote prayers, I think. And I thought, wow, they're dry. But you have to make a commitment to be involved. It's like being in the liturgy. Like you say, you can wake up and be 3 pages over here if you're not paying attention. But I always felt like it was my responsibility to be engaged, to pay attention, to be a part of it, and not just let it all drift through. But I have, and maybe part of it was reading this first time with Jerry too. Rote prayers took on a new meaning for me with some of this information. And if they do nothing more, they'll jumpstart me. I might not read the entire prayer because then I'll get distracted and have my own prayer going on. But I mean, I still think that's a great benefit that we can get from rote prayers, and also with the rote prayers that I've read, it's amazing throughout all the time. I mean, you can get one that's ancient, but throughout time, we really haven't changed much. Our needs and our worries and
No.
and desires really have been pretty similar.
And I really love this book, and I know I will read this book many times again. I understand why you said this. And on page 129, in the middle, beginning of the chapter, he says, often the way we relate to God is heavily conditioned by the way we relate to our parents, guardians, or other authoritarian figures. And I thought, bingo,
Sure.
how many people have I counseled, not about church or faith, but, and I always went back to the relationship to their parents, how they responded to affection or authority or any of those kinds of things. It's like, well, why didn't I ever think of that as part of the reason that sometimes my prayer life seems bound up? I had one of those relationships with my parents where it was very important for me to take care of myself, keep my mouth shut, not complain, not ask, and be responsible for my own world. And I see, I mean, while I have prayed vigorously hard in my life, I realize that if I didn't get anything out of this book, but those 2 lines, it would be enough. Because it was just, physician heal thyself, therapist heal thyself. Well, sometimes you don't see your own, you just keep skiing into the tree time and time again. But that was really important to me. And since this is an extremely common and universal problem in the spiritual life, and there's text in between there. But for those of us who had difficult childhoods and even difficult times as an adult with our parents, or those that were close to us like that. Well, duh, Sherry, I should have just written duh across there. How did you not get that? So I think for me, sometimes written prayers, rote prayers allowed me to come out of my own emotional, wrapped up like a mummy, loosened me up. It gave me a path to more personal prayer.
Yeah, that looks the last paragraph.
Yeah.
God, the ideal parent, is beyond what we can imagine. All loving, all kind, all generous. Can move beyond your negative experiences with the human father to embrace God, embrace God the Father, and let God the Father, our Father, embrace you.
So that's not the same God they taught me as a child. He had a bolt of lightning and was ready to send me to hell.
We were told that was a problem. You were told that.
Oh, time and time and time and time again by family and preachers.
Sure, sure. We had heard things from the neighbor lady that about Muslim life, and I asked a friend at work who was very into, whatever you call them, prayer book, but anyway,
Quran.
Quran, right. And I'd ask him questions about it. He said, no, that's not true. There's nowhere in the Quran you're gonna find this and that. You know, like, the girl wouldn't be allowed to marry who she went to the, the imam and asked him. He said, no, you don't have to marry the person parents pick out. You should marry the person that you love. And some of these things have been, like all religions, they have been interjected along the way, and people quit questioning it. They just think that's the way it is, it's presented that way to them, and not a good thing.
Well, you know, the other thing, the Lord helps those who help themselves, that's not in the Bible.
No,
You know, that's just.
I'd love to do
cultural
a
thing.
study, because I've seen a couple of different books that says, like the title would be Things That Are Not in the Bible.
Yes.
would be a good book to read.
Probably things that Mark Twain said.
Well, and it's stuff that, I mean, just rolls off people's tongue and, I mean, they probably swear it's in the Bible. Or at least the concept was in the Bible, and no.
I saw a book at the library one time where these things come from, and I should have read the whole thing. But it was pretty entertaining, you know.
Yeah, we mix up the social norms with biblical teachings and,
Yeah,
but I think I think a lot of leadership in churches have actually supported that in order to get more control of their parishioners.
I don't know.
It's
Yeah,
all about money.
I wouldn't go say
Can't
that.
control them, you know.
yeah.
This is a wonderful book that I discovered through Jerry too. And I think she's a nun. I'm pretty sure she's a nun.
I see praying, but I can't read the rest.
It's Psalms for Praying.
Oh,
And what she has done is she reinterpreted, or I don't know what the proper term is, but she made them all into prayers, personal prayers.
oh, beautiful.
And it's wonderful.
What's the name of it?
It's called Psalms for Praying. And her name is Nan Merrill, Merrill.
I think of something else with that.
Highly recommend it.
I'm going to read it, since we're doing Psalms.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna do in our women's study, we're gonna do psalms and get to bring
This
our
is
favorite
wonderful. I
psalms.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, the language is written like, oh my beloved. I mean, it's very,
Oh.
very beautiful.
So she doesn't smite any Hittites or anything.
No, no.
Good old
And I mean, it
days.
kind of is the way he was talking about it, you know, when he was talking about the Psalms or some scriptures saying to kill them all or whatever.
Yeah,
Maybe it was to kill, you know, something within us or,
Yeah.
yeah, there was reference to Saint Augustine in there,
Yeah.
using something as metal. So, yeah, I'm sure that's what she does.
well, next time, we will do chapter 9 and, I am here, the Daily Examine. Has anybody ever heard of the Daily Examine?
Yeah.
Yeah, good for you. I had never heard of it before I read this book, never ever. So, if you have a chance to try the exam, try it. I'm gonna be bad, get kidney stones anyway, and take a couple.
All you want.
We'll pray for you, David.
But,
I was just in an office and this lady's dog
Thank
was
you.
sniffing my pockets for them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then
Anybody
I
else want
plan to bring at least a little speaker. Because for some reason, when I try to show something from YouTube on here, apparently we don't have enough bandwidth down here. Because it'll go for 4 seconds and stop, and then go for 4 seconds. and stop. So I'm gonna try to bring that speaker, and at least we can listen to some lady lead us through the exam and to do it. I think that'd be kind of neat. It might take like 10 minutes, but I mean, just to try.
Yeah.
Or try it on your own, you know. whatever. And there are pages about it in here also behind the question, so help explain it a little bit more. I think it's a good practice. I haven't integrated that at all, but I think it's probably a really good one, at least in some format, even if it's abbreviated.
So we'll do just the one chapter.
Yeah, isn't it kind of long?
It is.
Yeah. And if we don't need the whole time, that's fine. We don't have to.
I'll have time to text the exam. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody, and
And Kathy, thank you so much for
Oh.
making this.
Well, I
Yeah, that
thought,
was nice.
I thought maybe, when the idea came to me, it was like, oh, how would you do that and put it in the bathroom there? First thing in the morning or something like that. See?
I'm sure you'll find this paper
Yeah.
taped up in my house.